couple weeks ago on cable TV, as I was surfing, I came across one of my favorite movies, Mutiny on the Bounty, with Clark Gable playing Fletcher Christian. Mutiny comes from a French word meaning rebellion. No bigger sin exists in any navy than mutiny. The mutiny on the Bounty took place in April of 1789 when Fletcher Christian and his 22 co-mutineers grabbed Captain William Bligh as he slept in his cabin. They forced him and 18 sailors who remained loyal to him into a small boat, 23 feet long, pretty much condemning them to death, setting them adrift in the middle of nowhere. Christian was one of Bligh's officers, but he wanted no more of the obedience his captain required. That night, Christian had reached the point when such obedience was a burden he no longer was willing to accept. He missed the easy life that he and his fellow sailors had enjoyed during their 5 months on that island paradise of Tahiti. Back on ship, once again under strict Navy discipline, the Bounty's hold at last filled with the breadfruit to be carried to the Caribbean islands. He rebelled against the necessity to obey orders. In the end, his action proved to be his own death and that of almost all the mutineers, as well as numerous Tahitians. Brothers and sisters, obedience is something that we find burdensome on many occasions. It seems that we're not alone in this. That experience of rebelling started early on with Adam and Eve, as we heard in our first reading. You could say that they were the first mutineers ever for their rebellion against God. Why did they rebel? Their well-being was God's foremost concern. They wanted to eat of that forbidden tree. We often want what is forbidden. God did not want them to know evil. Evil is something that would end up mastering them, as we see in that passage, and as we know in our own lives. We do not have control. So often, evil eats away at us. All of us deal with the desire to follow our own will rather than God's. Maybe that's why the first of the Beatitudes is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," which stresses trusting in God instead of ourselves. The same is true of the first of the 10 Commandments. It requires that we follow the one true God alone, since giving ourselves to false gods always leads to our destruction. My friends, when we ponder our lives and examine our experience of the world, it should be clear that self-will poses great hazards to us. A marriage breaks up because a spouse gets involved with somebody else, all the while knowing that this is in violation of God's will. Maybe you know a person who has made lots of money, but in ways that have left great destruction and hurt in their wake. A classmate of yours starts to say and do things that are almost the opposite of the person you've known for so long, just to be liked and accepted by a certain crowd. You look back with great regret on the pain that you caused your loved ones in the days when partying was your chief concern. As we heard in our reading from Paul's letter to the Romans, where Adam failed, Jesus succeeded. Through Adam's disobedience, sin infected all human beings. But in God's eyes, all humans are made right through Jesus' obedience that offset Adam's disobedience. Our Lord's triple triumph over the devil in our reading today from Matthew's Gospel proves his superiority over our sinful ancestors, the Israelites. During their desert wanderings, after being freed by God from slavery in Egypt, they repeatedly asserted their will against God's. When hungry, they did not trust that God would provide, but complained and tested God's patience, something that Jesus, as we see in our gospel, refuses to do. Though he has the power to change stones into bread, to use it would show a lack of trust in his Father, as the Israelites failed to trust. And Jesus will not go there. He knows that God never fails to provide and realizes full well that true life comes not from bread, but from feasting on his Father's word. The Israelites tested God again when they grumbled against God on account of their thirst, causing Moses to fear that they would kill him. They forced God's hand, and so God caused water to pour from a solid rock wall. Jesus, however, refuses Satan's temptation to force the Father to save him by throwing himself from a height atop the temple. Lastly, the Israelites fashioned a false god out of gold and worshiped it when Moses was so long away atop Mount Sinai for 40 days in conversation with God, receiving the 10 Commandments. But when the devil dangled the false god of power and wealth before Jesus, Jesus repudiated him. Our Lord remained obedient in contrast to the willfulness of Adam and the Israelites, for whom Satan proved more than a match. Satan will best us, brothers and sisters, unless we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, in which case we will never be conquered. Thanks to the compass and charts the mutineers allowed him, William Bligh, a superb seaman and navigator, saved himself and his fellow seamen from certain death in that small boat. Over the course of 47 days, in one of the greatest acts of seamanship in recorded history, he navigated through more than 4,000 miles of open ocean, taking that boat to the nearest European colony in that part of the world. He lost only one man who was killed when they landed on an island to seek provisions and were attacked by hostile natives. Jesus did something far more remarkable in saving us from sin and death by giving himself totally on the cross. In this we see that Jesus is our compass, our North Star, who will guide us safely throughout our sojourn in this world. Brothers and sisters, may we use these 40 days of Lent well, availing ourselves of prayer, fasting, and loving deeds, so that God may lead us to greater holiness. Nourished by Christ's body and blood, we will stay on course, allowing God to transform our mutinous self-will into the Christ-like obedience that will, at the end of our journey, find us feasting with all the saints at the heavenly banquet